what's happening is Jesus hears about John's death. So let's go ahead and just start off chapter 14, verse 1. I'll read it. At the time, Herod the Tetrarch heard about the fame of Jesus. Now, let's just stop right there. Herod, where we heard his name before.
When Jesus was born.
Okay, that was his daddy.
Herod Agrippa.
Huh?
Herod Agrippa.
That's later on. Okay, so there's a lot of different Herods in the New Testament. Okay, there was Herod the Great, who was basically ruled to about way before Jesus was born, all the way up to I think it was around about 1 or 2 A.D. And what happened is he was he was just a very mean and nasty man. I mean, he was he was one of these guys that if you didn't like him and he heard about it, he had it killed. He had his wives killed. He had brothers and family members killed. I mean, he was a major architect. He loved to build things. And what he did to appease the Jews, even though he was an Edomite himself and worshiped other pagan gods, he actually restored, not rebuild, but restored more of the actual temple. And so later on, when we read that that Jesus says you tear down this temple and it will be rebuilt in 3 days, they're going, hey, no way, man! It's taken all these years just to do this. And so that's where they're referring to.
This is the Herod that the wise man.
This is the Herod that the wise men came to and said, hey, look, we hear about this king being born, and Herod wanted to kill him. Now what happened is Mary and Joseph, angel says, you need to go. And so they went to Egypt. When Herod dies, they come back, but they hear his son, Herod, this one is in place. And so instead of going back to Jerusalem or to Bethlehem, they actually go and they went back to their hometown in Nazareth. And so Jesus was raised in Nazareth. All this meets what was already recorded in the Old Testament. And so this Herod, he was pretty wicked himself. But what happened is his half-brother, because it was his brother by another mom, his name Philip, was married to this woman named Herodess, and he didn't like her, and so he starts to marry her. And so John the Baptist hears what's going on, what Herod's doing, and he just stands up and he says, what you are doing is wrong. Well, this didn't really set well with Herod, but Herod didn't want to do anything because John the Baptist was well known. And he was fearful of what the Jews might do if he was to do anything. But his wife, who was his brother's wife, really didn't like being put down by John. And so she really wanted him in prison. So they locked him up in prison. All right, so let's go ahead and kind of read the story here. At the time, Herod the Tetrarch heard about the fame of Jesus, and he said to his servants, this is John the Baptist. He's been raised from the dead. That is why these miracle powers are at work in him. So he's talking about Jesus. For Herod, now what Matthew does is he records back and he says what happened. Because he thinks that John the Baptist has been raised from the dead in a sense and is doing all these miracles, and it's not, it's Jesus. But Herod, he hears about this, so he goes into a little bit of story about what happened. Herod had seized John and then bound him and put him in prison for the sake of Herodess, his brother Philip's wife, because John had been saying to him, it is not lawful for you to have her. And although he wanted to put him to death, he feared the people because they held him as to be a prophet. But when Herod's birthday came, verse 6, and the daughter of Herodess danced before the company, and it pleased him. This is like an exotic sexual dance. So it really pleased Herod, and he was drunk, as you'll see reading other Gospels, so that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she might ask. And in other Gospels it says, up to half of the kingdom. Wherever you want. I mean, he was drunk, he was making a fool of himself. So this prompted her to go and to her mom, and she says, give me the head of John the Baptist here on a platter. Now the king was sorry, but because of his oath and his guest, he had commanded to be given, he sent and had John beheaded in prison. And his head was brought to him in a platter and given to the girl, and she brought it to her mother. And then his disciples came and took the body and buried it, and they went and told Jesus. Now, I want to just talk, because there's not a whole lot you can do about this, but I want you to just kind of get the picture here. John the Baptist was very forthright. When we read earlier, back in the beginning of Matthew, that when he was baptizing, he told the Pharisees, you brood of vipers. What's bringing you here? Are you afraid of what God's going to do to you and everything else? But he's the one that proclaimed that Jesus, the Son of God, the Messiah, was going to come. John the Baptist was also the same person that baptized Jesus, and John says, no, I'm not worthy to do this. But John the Baptist was also not afraid to stand up against sin. Now, we've talked about this in the past, and I'll say it again. If you hear a person standing up and is pointing out sin to somebody, anybody, or if you're standing on a street corner doing it, do not look down upon that person. Period. I know some of us say, well, I don't know if I could really do that, or hey, I don't feel comfortable, doing that kind of stuff. I'm not going to sit here and say whether one is right or one is wrong. But I will tell you this. When God tells you that you need to stand up for something, you better follow whatever God's telling you to do. And God told John the Baptist where he should stand up, and he stood up for something that was wrong, because he saw Herod, even though Herod was not really living a good, quote-unquote, Jewish life. He saw that, hey, him being the king or the ruler over the Jews, he was giving the wrong impression as being the leader of this group of people by doing what he was wrong. And we've already seen this in the Old Testament prophets, where they did the very same thing to all the kings, both in the northern kingdom and in the southern kingdom. So John the Baptist was just being identical to a lot of the Old Testament prophets. But because of that, he got locked up in prison. And Jesus has already told us, hey, if the world hates me, the world's going to hate you. Unfortunately, a lot, and I'm not pointing fingers at anybody here in this room, but I'm saying this as America as a whole. There's a lot of Christians that would rather smooth over sins that's happening in our church, that's happening within the body of the believers, not so much what's going on in the world, because the world doesn't even believe in God. But when the body of believers begin to sin and to compromise sin that God says is totally wrong, then that's the people we need to be standing and saying, hey, look, what you're doing is wrong. And we've already seen this in Matthew. In Matthew chapter 7, it says, hey, look, if you got a problem, what do? You go to that person one-on-one. That doesn't work, then what do? You grab 2 or 3 others, and you go with you. Why? Because maybe what you're saying is not really wrong, and they need to hear that, and you need to be open. But if that continues on and everybody's in agreement what that one person's doing, then what you do is you bring it up before the church. Now, Paul, in Corinthians, there was a man who was committing immoral acts, and he says, get him out of the fellowship. And they did. But then you read the second letter of 2 Corinthians, it says, hey, look, love the guy. Don't get up. And unfortunately, the churches in America today, we go one extreme or the other. Either we sympathize and with all the people that are sinning, and we go, oh, okay, I'm not going to stand up. I don't want to hurt their feelings and everything. Or we get to the other place where we kick them out of the church, but we never restore them. We never reach out to them and say, hey, look, yes, you made a mistake, but we want to work with you. And somehow, the Bible is real clear. Yes, we stand up against sin, especially within the fellowship, but hey, we don't just push them off to the side and never talk to them again. And so we almost create in ourselves very much like the Sadducees and the Pharisees, that hey, I'm righteous, I'm too righteous, and if you've sinned, we're going to excommunicate you out of the church. You're no longer a part of this church, and there's no way to work your way back, because God forgives all sins. But the thing is in the American church today, we know we do things that are wrong, that displeases God, that is sin, And we've already seen where Paul writes and says, hey, look, even if you feel like it's wrong to eat meat, and you eat meat, that's a sin to you. Because you're disobeying what God's Spirit is trying to tell you at that point in time. You may not tell it to Kyle. You may say, Kyle, I can't go. You can eat snake, whatever you want to eat. But to me, in my heart, I feel like God's saying, hey, no, I need to follow the commands of only eating kosher type meat, or the meat that the Jews were supposed to eat. And so Paul's saying, hey, look, if that's what the Holy Spirit is laying upon your heart and everything else, then hey, that's fine. And if you break that, then you're sinning against God. But if you Paul was big about this, says, hey, you can eat whatever you want to eat. So those folks are not wrong. He says, don't judge each other on those type of things. But there was clear sins that were going on. And so John the Baptist was sitting there, and he was telling his leader, hey, and his wife, who shouldn't have been his wife, what you guys are doing is wrong. And they didn't like it, especially the wife. So his head got beheaded. When Jesus hears about that, he takes off and he withdraws to a boat in desolate place by himself. But the crowds heard about it.
Can we stop for a minute? I want to stop because
Sure.
there's at least the NIV version appears to be conflicting in what it said.
Okay.
So I don't know if anybody else has got a different version, but I want to read what NIV says. At the time, Herod the Tetrarch heard the reports about Jesus, and he said to his attendants, and I'm quoting it now, "This is John the Baptist. He has risen from the dead." Which would imply that Herod already had him dead, if you understand what I'm saying.
Right.
This is why miraculous powers are at work in him. Now Herod had arrested John and bound him and put him in prison because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife. For John had been saying to him, "It is not lawful for you to have her." Herod wanted to kill John. Now wait a second. He wanted to kill him. He knew he was alive. In fact, he sends his people out to behead him. Where does it say, "This is John the Baptist. He has been risen from the dead"? How do you kill somebody that you already killed?
Well,
Do you understand what I'm saying?
I think it comes down to 3. Hold on, no.
Go ahead.
I think it comes down to verse 3 because the way it's written, they said this because it already happened, and the 3 to the end is explaining what had happened in the past. For Herod had laid hold of John.
Right.
He had already done this, bound him. This happens to where it says they had the birthday celebration. They killed him, and that's the justification why they thought he was back.
But again, I'm saying what reads here. It's Herod that says, "This is John the Baptist. He has risen from the dead." It's Herod that makes this statement, not the attendants.
Yes.
And he said to his attendants, "This is John the Baptist."
Right, okay, so let me back up, and this is exactly what John said, but let me just back up. What's happening here is Matthew's telling the story, okay, and I think Mark basically repeats the same thing. But what happens is that it's starting off, and what Matthew's saying is that at the time, John the Baptist has already died. So verse 1 and 2 is John the Baptist is dead. And so what happened is Herod hears about Jesus, and he's thinking to himself, hey, John the Baptist has risen back up from the dead. Okay? And it must be John the Baptist that are doing all these miraculous signs because he hears about Jesus and he thinks Jesus is just John the Baptist raised from the dead. But then what the writer of this doing is says, okay, now that Herod's thinking this, they back up a little bit and they say, hey, let me tell you why Herod's thinking this. Because Herod was thinking this and then he goes into the story of how John the Baptist was beheaded. But at the beginning, in verses 1 and 2, Herod is thinking, like you said, Herod's thinking that, hey, Jesus must be John the Baptist raised from the dead. Okay? Later on, you'll see in Luke, says that the Pharisees and Sadducees came up to Jesus and says, Herod wants to kill you. And Jesus says, well, look out, tell that old fox, where he can go, basically. But basically, what was happening?
I believe that Jesus
No, so NIV is not wrong in what you're reading. It's just that what happened
That
is
classifier
that those
of
first
time.
two verses are talking about something in the future after an event has already taken place. And so,
I
and
see
then,
what you're saying, it's just that it's very archaic.
Yeah.
It's not just that.
The way it's written.
yeah,
The
It
when
doesn't
it,
say it
changes
isn't
anyway.
right.
When
People
it
back
says
then
now,
wouldn't have understood.
right,
the now is a precursor to why did he do it? Because he believes this. This is what happened.
Right.
Same thing with the for this already happened, so that's why he was saying.
right.
this.
So what happens is the first two verses, he hears about Jesus and he's thinking, hey, I had John the Baptist killed. Why is John the Baptist back around again? Thinking that Jesus was John the Baptist raised back from the dead. But then what the writer does is goes in and explains how John the Baptist got beheaded.
You know, the other thing that is amazing is that if it says, again, Herod wanted to kill John, but
Right.
he was afraid of the people because they considered him a prophet. Guess what? He did it anyhow.
And guess
I mean,
what? The people didn't revolt against
Yeah.
him. Okay,
I mean,
and that's a key piece.
If you're afraid of that, okay, that he is a prophet, and if you kill him, you're going to get in trouble. The man is stupid to go ahead and do it.
I think that's what
And so
that's
I-
Well,
what
it's because
alcohol
it-
do to you.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Make you lose
but
Jesus.
but we're going to get into this. But but Jesus is actually going to go in front of Herod, and Herod can't wait.
It's the same Herod?
Yes, same Herod. Jesus is going. This is
Yeah.
during his trial,
Right.
which really wasn't supposed to be a legal trial. But here Jesus is going to come before Herod, and Jesus doesn't say a word, not a word. And Herod's wanting to see, hey, do a miracle sign, do something. Jesus doesn't give him anything.
I realize that.
The character of Herod, at least in this one, which is the same one that when he died, their kind of main goal and the reason why the previous Herod built the temple and all that stuff is they were kind of like Pontius Pilate. They were over the Jews in general and trying to make sure that they didn't revolt, which is why Pontius acted the way that he did, to try to kind of make sure that there wasn't a revolt. And same thing with Herod. His father did such a great job. He may have been evil and vindictive, but he actually convinced the Romans to treat the Jews a specific way to allow them their temple and all this and that so that they wouldn't revolt. And that kind of passed down, so that's why he's kind of scared in that aspect.
Right.
He's
And
supposed
this
to
Herod
make sure
didn't
that
have
they
the
don't.
same authority
Mhm.
as his dad did. Okay, his dad had a lot bigger authority. He had what they call 1/4 of the authority. So, but he was more cautious.
So they split his dad's kingdom into fourths?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
So and it doesn't go into that in scripture,
Right.
but that's where you have to read Josephus and the commentaries and stuff like that. All right. So now Jesus, hears about that he would